Why is it illegal in this state to get a fish drunk, yet an entire river once burst into flames 13 times and nobody cared? Welcome to 71 Dumbest Things from Ohio, where we're exposing the wildest facts in American history, like the time Ohio produced 7 U.S. presidents that nobody can actually name, alongside absurd laws about fishing licenses for mice and cities literally named Knockemstiff. We're proving which insane stories are 100% real history and which are just Midwest myths, so hit that subscribe button before we reveal the truth. 1. Ohio's state flag looks like something a kindergartner designed on a dare. And the wildest part is that nobody questioned it for 100 years. Every single state in America went with a rectangle, a normal, boring, sensible rectangle. But Ohio looked at the options and said absolutely not. In 1902, Ohio officially adopted a pennant-shaped flag, the same shape you'd wave at a football game, and lawmakers signed off on it like it was completely fine. The rest of the country just stared. Ohio didn't care. It took until 2002 for Congress to even formally acknowledge how the flag was supposed to be properly folded. 2. The Wright brothers are American legends, the 2 Ohio boys who figured out how to make a machine fly, and the absolute comedy of their story is that Ohio's own weather essentially rejected them. Wilbur and Orville built the entire airplane right there in Dayton, Ohio, tinkering in a bicycle shop like a pair of absolute madmen with a dream. But when it came time to actually fly the thing, Ohio's wind conditions were too inconsistent and unpredictable. So they packed up their invention, drove it to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, and made history there instead. North Carolina still prints first in flight on every license plate. Ohio has never fully recovered from that loss. 3. Ohio was not formally ratified as a state by Congress until 1953, which means for a full 150 years, Ohio was technically operating as an unofficial state while nobody in Washington noticed or apparently cared enough to fix it. Ohio joined the Union in 1803, held elections, paid taxes, sent soldiers to wars, and contributed presidents to the White House, all while existing in a bizarre legal gray zone that nobody bothered to address. A congressman named George Bender finally brought it up in 1953, and Congress quietly passed the ratification like it was a minor clerical error. 150 years of accidental statehood in Ohio just kept showing up anyway. 4. A real town in Ohio is named Nakamstiff, and the backstory is exactly as chaotic as the name suggests. Back in the 1800s, a group of locals gathered for what was supposed to be a completely ordinary church meeting, the kind of wholesome community event where neighbors discuss crops and wave at each other politely. But instead, a violent argument erupted so spectacularly that the entire incident became the permanent identity of the place. Someone proposed naming the town after what happened that day. Everyone sitting in that room agreed, and Knockemstiff was submitted to the post office as a legitimate address. The government approved it without blinking, and Ohio moved forward like this was completely normal behavior. 5. Cleveland's Cuyahoga River catching fire sounds like a fever dream someone invented to make Ohio look bad. But that river actually caught fire 13 separate times because industrial companies spent decades dumping oil, chemicals, and waste directly into the water until it became genuinely flammable. Businesses along the banks treated the Cuyahoga like a free personal garbage disposal, and nobody with authority stopped them for years. The 1969 fire finally exploded into national headlines and directly inspired the Clean Water Act and the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency. Ohio accidentally launched the entire American environmental movement by first allowing one of its own rivers to become a legitimate fire hazard. 6. Ohio produced 7 United States presidents born directly within its borders, which sounds like the kind of fact that should come with a parade and a highway billboard every 50 miles. But most Americans cannot name even 2 Ohio presidents without immediately reaching for their phones. William Henry Harrison, Ulysses Grant, Rutherford Hayes, James Garfield, Benjamin Harrison, William McKinley, and Warren Harding all came from Ohio, shaped the country, and got almost zero credit for it. Political historians call Ohio the mother of presidents with complete sincerity, while regular people nod along and quietly have no idea what anyone is talking about. 7 presidents, and somehow Ohio still gets overlooked at every dinner table conversation about American history. 7. William Henry Harrison of Ohio showed up to his own inauguration in freezing rain without a hat or coat, because he apparently wanted the entire country to know he was the toughest man alive, then stood outside and delivered the longest inaugural address in United States history at nearly 2 hours long while the crowd slowly turned into human popsicles. Harrison caught pneumonia almost immediately, was carried into the White House bedridden, and died 31 days later without signing a single piece of legislation or accomplishing anything as president whatsoever. He prepared the longest speech in inauguration history and served the shortest presidency in American history, making William Henry Harrison the undisputed king of all setup and absolutely zero payoff. 8. Ohio once had more canals than Venice, Italy, which is a fact so bizarre it sounds like someone lost a bet and had to say it out loud at a press conference. In the early 1800s, Ohio went completely canal-obsessed, digging hundreds of miles of waterways across the entire state, because moving goods by water was the most advanced technology available, and Ohio was determined to be the future. Engineers were celebrated, entire towns were built around canal routes, and Ohio genuinely believed it had cracked transportation forever. Then the railroad arrived, and within 20 years every single canal became completely obsolete, economically worthless, and abandoned. Ohio built an entire infrastructure empire that expired before anyone finished paying for it. 9. The very first professional baseball team in American history was Cincinnati's Red Stockings, formed in 1869 right there in Ohio. And they came out so aggressively dominant in their debut season that they went completely undefeated the entire year without losing a single game. Ohio essentially invented professional baseball and then immediately demonstrated to the rest of the country exactly how the sport was supposed to be played. The Red Stockings traveled across America dismantling every team they faced so consistently and so ruthlessly that other cities scrambled to form professional clubs just for the chance to stop them. Ohio built the foundation of America's national pastime from scratch, which makes a century of Cleveland sports heartbreak feel especially personal. 10. Neil Armstrong, the first human being in all of recorded history to walk on the surface of the moon, grew up in Wapakoneta, Ohio, a town operating so quietly and on such a small scale that it still functions with essentially one traffic light, coordinating the movement of its entire population. Armstrong left this tiny Ohio town, became a NASA astronaut, traveled 250,000 miles through space, stepped onto the lunar surface in 1969 in front of a watching world of 600 million people, and then returned to Ohio like a completely regular person running a normal errand. Wapakoneta eventually built a museum in his honor, which is genuinely the bare minimum Ohio could offer the man who touched the moon. 11. Ohio has a law sitting officially on its books, making it completely illegal to get a fish drunk. And that law remained there, unchallenged and unamended, well into the modern era, without a single Ohio lawmaker standing up in the State House to ask any follow-up questions about it. At some point in Ohio history, a real elected official with real legislative power sat down at a real desk and decided that fish intoxication was a serious enough public threat to require a written law with an enforceable fine attached to it. Nobody documented what specific incident inspired this decision. There is no famous fish drunk scandal anywhere in Ohio's historical record. The law simply exists, quietly protecting Ohio's underwater population from citizens who apparently cannot be trusted around aquatic life and alcohol simultaneously. 12. Thomas Edison was born in Milan, Ohio, grew up breathing Ohio air, went to Ohio schools, and then packed his entire life into a bag and moved to New Jersey, where he proceeded to invent the light bulb, the phonograph, the motion picture camera, and roughly 1,000 other things that permanently changed human civilization. Ohio produced one of the greatest inventors in American history, raised him from birth, and then watched him walk out the door and hand all of his genius to another state without looking back. New Jersey got the patents, the laboratory, the legacy, and the fame. Ohio got a small historical marker in Milan that most people drive past without slowing down. 13. The Great Dayton Flood of 1913 killed over 360 people, wiped out entire neighborhoods, and remains the deadliest weather disaster in Ohio history, yet most Americans have genuinely never heard of it. and could not find Dayton on a map under pressure. Heavy rainfall caused multiple rivers to overflow simultaneously, sending walls of water crashing through the city so fast that people had no time to react or evacuate before entire blocks were submerged. The destruction was so complete that Dayton rebuilt itself from almost nothing afterward. Ohio experienced one of the most catastrophic natural disasters in American history, and somehow the story never made it into a single mainstream history textbook that anyone actually reads. 14. Ohio's official state nickname is the Heart of It All, which sounds like something a proud Ohioan came up with after a very emotional county fair. But the actual origin of that slogan is that it was invented by an advertising agency based in Michigan, which is Ohio's most direct and longtime rival state. Michigan, the state that has spent decades in a heated sports rivalry with Ohio, the state whose residents and Ohio residents actively argue with each other at every possible opportunity, was handed the contract to brand Ohio's entire identity and came up with the Heart of It All. Ohio approved it, printed it on signs, stamped it on license plates, and has been using Michigan's marketing ever since. 15. The Toledo War of 1835 sounds like a catastrophic military conflict when you first hear the name, but the reality is that Ohio and Michigan mobilized actual armed militias, sent real soldiers marching toward each other over a narrow 5-mile strip of land along their shared border. And after weeks of escalating tension and aggressive posturing, the grand total number of casualties from the entire conflict was exactly one person who was non-fatally stabbed during an argument and recovered completely fine. Congress eventually intervened, gave Michigan the Upper Peninsula as a consolation prize, and both states went home. Ohio won a strip of land containing Toledo, which Michigan residents will tell you was not actually worth fighting for. 16. John Glenn of Ohio became the first American astronaut to orbit the entire Earth in 1962, circling the planet 3 times at 17,000 miles per hour while the nation held its breath and Walter Cronkite narrated every moment on live television. And then Glenn came back, became a United States Senator, and returned to space again at 77 years old in 1998, making him officially the oldest human being ever to leave Earth's atmosphere. One Ohio man bookended the entire American space age with his own personal career. He went to space as a young hero and went back as a senior citizen just to make absolutely sure nobody forgot what Ohio was capable of producing. 17. The Cincinnati Reds are one of baseball's oldest and most recognizable franchises. But during the 1950s, team ownership looked at their own name and genuinely panicked because the word Red sounded uncomfortably close to communist sympathizer language during the height of McCarthyism and the Red Scare sweeping across America. So the Cincinnati Reds officially renamed themselves the Cincinnati Redlegs, changed their branding, updated their merchandise, and spent years trying to distance their baseball team from any association with Soviet ideology. A professional baseball franchise changed its entire name because of Cold War paranoia. They eventually changed back to the Reds once the political temperature cooled down, but for several seasons Ohio's oldest team was hiding from Joseph McCarthy through creative rebranding. 18. Akron, Ohio was once so completely dominant in rubber production that the entire global industry operated out of this one Midwestern city, earning Akron the title of Rubber Capital of the World, while Goodyear, Firestone, and Goodrich all ran massive operations directly out of town. The rubber industry made Akron wealthy, built its neighborhoods, filled its factories with workers, and defined the city's entire identity for generations. Then, manufacturing shifted, companies relocated, jobs evaporated, and Akron went from being one of America's most important industrial cities to being one of the fastest shrinking cities in the entire United States. The rubber capital of the world now has more abandoned buildings than active rubber factories, and the contrast is genuinely staggering. 19. Ohio's official state motto is, "With God all things are possible," which is a direct quote from the Bible. And at some point, a group of very determined Ohio citizens decided to challenge that motto in federal court, arguing it was an unconstitutional violation of the separation of church and state that the Founding Fathers worked extremely hard to establish. The case went through the court system with both sides arguing passionately, lawyers billing enormous hourly rates, and judges deliberating carefully over whether Ohio's government was technically endorsing religion by printing a Bible verse on official state documents. Ohio won the case and kept its motto, but only barely, meaning Ohio's relationship with its own state slogan has been legally contested and almost taken away. 20. Charles Kettering grew up in Loudonville, Ohio, became one of America's most celebrated inventors, and among his many contributions to modern life, he helped develop and promote leaded gasoline, which was added to fuel to prevent engine knocking and was marketed as a revolutionary advancement in automobile technology. What nobody fully understood at the time, or chose to acknowledge, was that burning leaded gasoline released toxic lead particles into the air that billions of people then breathed for decades across the entire 20th century. Scientists eventually linked widespread lead exposure to serious neurological damage, particularly in children. One Ohio inventor's decision contributed to what many public health researchers now consider one of the most damaging environmental mistakes in all of American history. 21. The Cleveland Spiders finished the 1899 baseball season with a record of 20 wins and 134 losses, which stands as the single worst performance record in the entire history of professional sports, and no team, across any league in any era, has ever come close to matching that level of catastrophic failure. The Spiders were so unwatchably bad that their own ownership deliberately gutted the roster mid-season by transferring all the talented players to their other franchise in St. Louis, leaving Cleveland with a skeleton crew of misfits and cast-offs who had no realistic chance of winning anything. Fans stopped showing up entirely, and the team was mockingly nicknamed the Misfits and the Wanderers by sports reporters. After the season ended, the franchise was immediately disbanded and erased permanently from professional baseball. 22. Ohio passed a law in 1831, making it officially illegal to get a fish drunk, and the most bewildering part of this entire legislative episode is not the law itself, but the complete absence of any historical record explaining what specific incident or series of incidents prompted a room full of elected Ohio lawmakers to sit down together and decide that fish intoxication had become a serious enough public problem to require a written statute with an enforceable financial penalty attached to it. No famous fish drowning in whiskey scandal appears anywhere in Ohio's documented history. No newspaper from that era reports a wave of citizens walking into rivers with bottles of bourbon looking for aquatic drinking companions. The law was simply written, voted on, passed, and placed on the books where it remained completely intact and technically enforceable well into the modern era, without a single serious attempt to remove it. 23. The first night baseball game in Major League Baseball history was played in Cincinnati, Ohio, on May 24, 1935, and the moment was so historically significant that President Franklin Roosevelt himself participated by pressing a button from the White House in Washington, D.C. that triggered the stadium lights at Crossley Field, 700 miles away in Cincinnati, illuminating a professional baseball diamond under electric lights for the very first time in the sport's history. Reds general manager Larry McPhail had fought for years to make night baseball a reality, believing it would allow working-class fans to attend games after their shifts ended. Every single night game played in every major league ballpark across America today traces its direct origin back to that one evening in Cincinnati, Ohio, that the rest of baseball tried very hard to ignore and dismiss at the time. 24. Ulysses S. Grant was born in the tiny river town of Point Pleasant, Ohio, in 1822, and his life story contains one of the most dramatic and heartbreaking final chapters of any American president in history, because after commanding the Union Army to victory in the Civil War and serving 2 terms in the White House, Grant trusted the wrong business partner and lost every single dollar he had ever accumulated in a financial fraud scheme that left him completely and utterly bankrupt in his early 60s. Then his doctors delivered the additional news that he had terminal throat cancer caused by decades of cigar smoking and had only months to live. Grant sat down and wrote his personal memoirs in a furious race against his own approaching death, to leave his wife something to live on, and finish the final pages just days before he died. 25. Garrett Morgan was a black entrepreneur and inventor who operated out of Cleveland, Ohio, and in 1923 he developed and patented the 3-position traffic signal, that added a critical warning interval between the stop-and-go commands, giving drivers enough time to safely clear intersections before opposing traffic was released, and this design became the direct foundation of every traffic light system installed across the United States from that point forward. Morgan had personally witnessed a serious collision at a Cleveland intersection and decided the existing two-position signals were fundamentally dangerous. His invention was adopted by cities nationwide and eventually purchased by General Electric. The deeply ironic footnote to this story is that Ohio, where Morgan invented the modern traffic signal, consistently ranks among America's worst states for traffic-related deaths and highway fatalities annually. 26. The Pro Football Hall of Fame sits in Canton, Ohio, and the reason Canton earned that permanent honor is that the National Football League was literally born there on September 17, 1920, when representatives from 4 existing professional football teams gathered inside Ralph Hayes' Hupmobile automobile dealership showroom, because it was simply the largest available space in the city that day, and sat among car displays and borrowed chairs, and established the American Professional Football Association, which later became the NFL. The entry fee to join this new league was $100 per franchise, though none of the founding teams actually paid it. What started as an informal business meeting in an Ohio car showroom that afternoon became the organizational foundation of a sports league that today generates over $18 billion in annual revenue. 27. Ohio's current capital, Columbus, was not the state's first capital or its second capital, because when Ohio achieved statehood, the government initially set up operations in Chillicothe, which served as the first capital. Then lawmakers decided Zanesville was more centrally located and moved everything there in 1810. Then decided Zanesville was actually wrong and moved the entire state government back to Chillicothe again in 1812. And then finally in 1816, after years of this geographic indecision, a newly planned city called Columbus was selected as the permanent capital because it sat closer to the state's geographic center. The entire process of Ohio finding its own capital took over a decade of moving government offices back and forth across the state while lawmakers argued about maps. Chillicothe holds the distinction of being the only Ohio city to serve as state capital twice and lose it twice. 28. James Garfield of Mentor, Ohio, was shot by a disgruntled office seeker named Charles Guiteau at a Washington, D.C. railroad station on July 2, 1881. And what the history books rarely emphasize clearly enough is that the bullet lodged in Garfield's back was not in a fatal position, and multiple physicians who examined him in the immediate aftermath believed he had a strong chance of surviving the wound entirely. What transformed a survivable injury into a death sentence was the behavior of his attending doctors, who spent the following 79 days repeatedly pushing unwashed fingers and unsterilized metal probes into the wound searching for the bullet, while Joseph Lister's germ theory was already widely published and accepted in European medical practice. The resulting infection consumed Garfield from the inside and killed him on September 19, 1881, while the bullet itself remained harmlessly lodged in his back. 29. Ohio once manufactured approximately half of all the glass produced across the entire United States, making it the undisputed national capital of glass production for a significant stretch of American industrial history, with major factories operating across northwestern Ohio, particularly in cities like Toledo, which earned the nickname the Glass City while supplying windows, bottles, lenses, and industrial glass products to the entire country. Toledo's position along Lake Erie gave it cheap water transportation and abundant natural gas fuel that made glass manufacturing extraordinarily efficient and profitable for decades. Then West Virginia began aggressively recruiting glass manufacturers by offering dramatically cheaper labor costs and more favorable tax arrangements, and the industry responded by relocating almost entirely out of Ohio within a single decade, leaving Toledo and surrounding communities with shuttered factories and a Glass City nickname attached to an industry that had completely abandoned it. 30. Lake Erie sits along Ohio's entire northern border, and by 1970, it had been so thoroughly destroyed by decades of industrial discharge, municipal sewage dumping, and agricultural phosphorus runoff from surrounding states that scientists formally announced the lake was ecologically dead, meaning its oxygen levels had dropped so catastrophically that fish were dying in massive numbers and entire sections of the lake could no longer support aquatic life in any meaningful form. Time magazine and multiple major newspapers ran stories treating Lake Erie's ecological collapse as a death, with one publication running what amounted to a printed obituary for an entire Great Lake, something that had never happened before in American environmental history. The public outrage over Lake Erie's condition became one of the primary catalysts that led directly to the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency in 1970 and the passage of the Clean Water Act in 1972. 31. The Cleveland Browns are the only franchise in the entire National Football League with absolutely no logo on their helmet, which from a distance looks like a bold and deliberate design statement. But the actual origin of this iconic blankness is that when the Browns took the field in 1950, the plain orange helmet was never meant to be permanent and was always intended as a temporary placeholder while the organization quietly worked on developing an actual logo design to eventually place on it. That internal design conversation apparently never reached any conclusion because seasons turned into decades. Helmet design trends came and went across the entire league. Every other NFL franchise decorated their helmets with something identifiable and meaningful, and Cleveland simply never finished the task. The Browns now present the no-logo helmet as a proud organizational tradition, which is a remarkably confident Ohio way of reframing an administrative job that nobody ever completed. 32. Warren G. Harding of Marion, Ohio, is consistently ranked among the worst presidents in American history, and the details of his administration absolutely justify that ranking. But perhaps the single most personally humiliating detail of his entire time in the White House is that his Airedale Terrier Laddie Boy, who lived in the White House and attended cabinet meetings sitting in his own specially crafted chair, received significantly more fan mail from ordinary American citizens every single week than Warren G. Harding himself did. The people who had actually elected Harding to lead their country apparently felt a deeper and more genuine emotional connection to his dog than to the president making decisions in the Oval Office. Laddie Boy had dedicated press coverage, a devoted national following, and more authentic public affection than the Ohio man who brought him to Washington in the first place. 33. Benjamin Harrison of North Bend, Ohio, arrived at the White House after winning the 1888 presidential election, carrying a personal reputation for being so extraordinarily cold and socially uncomfortable in human interactions that his own White House staff privately nicknamed him the human iceberg because he refused to make genuine eye contact during conversations, avoided all casual small talk with everyone around him, including his own employees, and approached mandatory public handshaking events with the visible enthusiasm of someone attending their own root canal appointment. Harrison's personal secretary reportedly prepared visitors in advance by warning them explicitly not to expect any warmth, humor, or genuine human engagement from the president because none would be offered under any circumstances whatsoever. Foreign diplomats left their official audiences with Harrison, describing the experience as uniquely chilling, and Harrison governed 60 million Americans while finding direct human contact apparently unbearable. 34. Youngstown, Ohio was once among the top 5 steel-producing cities in the entire United States. A thundering industrial powerhouse where blast furnaces operated continuously around the clock and the steel mills provided stable, well-paying jobs to tens of thousands of workers who built entire middle-class neighborhoods and communities directly around the factories in the Mahoning Valley. The region was called Steel Valley, with complete legitimacy because it was producing metal that constructed American skyscrapers, bridges, automobiles, and military equipment at a scale that made Youngstown economically essential to the whole country. Then, on September 19, 1977, which locals still call Black Monday, Youngstown Sheet and Tube announced immediate closure of its largest facility, triggering a cascade of shutdowns that eliminated over 50,000 manufacturing jobs within a single decade, leaving Youngstown in an economic devastation it has never recovered from. 35. Charles Brush was a Cleveland, Ohio inventor and entrepreneur who in 1879 installed the world's very first electric arc street lighting system along Public Square in downtown Cleveland, illuminating city streets with electric light for the first time in American history, while crowds of genuinely amazed citizens gathered to witness outdoor electric lighting that none of them had ever seen before in their entire lives. Brush's achievement placed Cleveland at the absolute cutting edge of American technological progress and established Ohio as a serious center of electrical innovation, right at the beginning of the electric age when the entire concept of electric light was still considered almost miraculous by ordinary people. The brutally ironic historical contrast is that Cleveland today consistently ranks among the most poorly lit major cities in the Midwest, with city infrastructure reports repeatedly flagging inadequate street lighting as an ongoing public safety problem. 36. The first organized ambulance service in the entire history of the United States was established in Cincinnati, Ohio, in 1865, operating out of Commercial Hospital and sending horse-drawn vehicles into the streets to retrieve sick and injured patients and transport them to medical care at a time when no other American city had conceived of emergency medical response as a municipal responsibility worth organizing and funding. Cincinnati essentially invented the idea that a city owed its citizens the service of coming to find them when they were too hurt or too ill to reach a hospital on their own. This revolutionary concept spread across American cities over the following decades and became the direct foundation of the modern emergency medical services system that operates nationwide today. Ohio invented the ambulance and now ranks below the national average in emergency medical response times. 37. William McKinley was born in Niles, Ohio, and carried his identity as the last American president who had served in the Civil War as a central part of his public image throughout his entire political career. And on September 6, 1901, he was standing at a public reception line at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, personally greeting ordinary citizens when his secretary George Cortelyou had already approached him twice that same day, warning him explicitly that the open handshake line was a dangerous security vulnerability that should be shut down immediately for his own protection. McKinley refused to close the line on both occasions because he believed American citizens deserved direct personal access to their president. An assassin named Leon Czolgosz wrapped a revolver in a white handkerchief to disguise it, joined the line, waited his turn patiently, and shot McKinley twice at point-blank range when he stepped forward to shake hands. 38. Rutherford B. Hayes of Delaware, Ohio ran for president in 1876 against Democrat Samuel Tilden, and when the votes were counted, Hayes had clearly and undeniably lost the national popular vote, meaning more American citizens had chosen his opponent than him. Yet Hayes ended up being inaugurated as the 19th president of the United States anyway, through one of the most controversial and deliberately arranged political backroom deals in the entire history of American democracy. A special congressional commission was constructed to adjudicate disputed electoral votes from 3 southern states, and the commission voted along pure party lines to award every single disputed vote to Hayes in exchange for an agreement to pull federal troops out of the South and end Reconstruction entirely. Democrats called it a stolen election publicly and loudly. Hayes served one uncomfortable term, and historians have questioned the legitimacy of his presidency ever since. 39. The first concrete street ever constructed in the United States was poured in Bellefontaine, Ohio in 1891. And the man who made it happen was a local hardware dealer named George Bartholomew, who believed so completely in concrete as a superior road surface that when city officials expressed skepticism and reluctance, he offered to personally finance the entire project himself and personally guarantee its durability with his own money, if the city would simply allow him to demonstrate what concrete pavement could do on a real public street. The officials accepted his offer. Bartholomew poured the concrete on a stretch of Court Avenue, and the pavement performed so durably and so effectively that the concept of concrete road surfaces spread across the entire United States and became the literal foundation of American road infrastructure. That original stretch of concrete poured in Bellefontaine, Ohio in 1891 is still physically present and still in active use today. 40. Roy Plunkett was a young chemist originally from New Carlisle, Ohio, who was working at a DuPont laboratory in New Jersey in 1938, attempting to develop a new refrigerant compound when he stored cylinders of tetrafluoroethylene gas overnight and returned the following morning expecting the gas to flow out normally when he opened the valves. But nothing came out despite the cylinders still weighing exactly what they had weighed when they were full the previous evening. Instead of discarding the cylinders as failed experiments, Plunkett cut one open out of scientific curiosity and discovered the interior coated with a slippery white powder that turned out to be a substance with the lowest friction coefficient of any solid material ever scientifically recorded, meaning almost nothing in existence could stick to its surface. That accidental powder from an Ohio chemist's misfired experiment became Teflon, and now lines hundreds of millions of cooking pans worldwide. 41. A group of idealistic Americans founded a settlement in Clermont County, Ohio in 1844 and named it Utopia because they genuinely believed they had engineered a perfect socialist commune that would demonstrate to the entire watching world exactly how human society should organize itself with shared property, communal labor, collective decision-making, and complete economic equality distributed among every resident who committed themselves to the experiment. The founders promoted Utopia enthusiastically across the country, attracted true believers who sold their personal possessions, and moved their families to this Ohio field, convinced they were participating in the future of civilization. Within 18 months, the entire commune had collapsed completely under the accumulated weight of personal disagreements, economic disputes, incompatible personalities, and the basic human inability to agree on anything consistently for any sustained period of time. The town of Utopia, Ohio still exists on maps today as a quiet, unincorporated community, which is the most honest ending this story could possibly have. 42. Ohio has absolutely no natural lakes within its borders, which is a geographical fact that surprises most people who assume a Midwestern state surrounded by Great Lakes would have at least some naturally occurring freshwater lakes scattered across its landscape. But every single body of water inside Ohio that gets called a lake is either a reservoir created by damming a river, a man-made recreational impoundment dug deliberately for human use, or a shared border water body like Lake Erie that technically belongs to multiple states simultaneously. Ohio essentially borrowed the idea of having lakes without producing any of its own through natural geological processes. The state that sits directly on the shore of one of the largest freshwater lakes on the entire planet somehow managed to arrive at statehood without a single naturally formed lake of its own, anywhere within its boundaries. 43. The first police car in American history was not a roaring gasoline-powered cruiser, but a quiet electric wagon operated by the Akron, Ohio Police Department, starting in 1899. A battery-powered vehicle that could travel approximately 30 miles on a single charge before needing to be reconnected to an electrical source, which made it surprisingly practical for patrolling Akron streets at a time when most American police officers were still conducting their entire shifts on foot or horseback. Akron essentially invented motorized law enforcement in America, with an electric vehicle over a century before electric cars became a mainstream conversation topic. The Akron Police Department was operating emission-free electric patrol vehicles in 1899, while the rest of American law enforcement had not yet conceived of putting officers in any kind of motorized vehicle at all. 44. Ohio has an active law on its books requiring any restaurant that serves horse meat to display a clearly visible sign on the premises reading "Horse meat served here," so that customers are fully informed before ordering anything from the menu, which raises the immediate question of how many Ohio restaurants are currently serving horse meat. Quietly enough that lawmakers felt a mandatory disclosure. Sign was a necessary legislative priority worth committing to paper and enforcing with state authority. The law does not ban horse meat from being served in Ohio restaurants at all. It simply demands transparency about the situation, suggesting that somewhere in Ohio's legislative history, there was a documented problem with citizens accidentally consuming horse without their knowledge or consent. The sign requirement remains active and technically enforceable today. 45. The Ashtabula Railway disaster occurred on December 29, 1876, when a passenger train crossing the Ashtabula River Bridge in northeastern Ohio caused the bridge to collapse entirely, sending 11 rail cars plunging 70 feet into the frozen river below and killing 92 people in one of the deadliest railroad accidents in American history. And the detail that transforms this tragedy from a terrible accident into something almost incomprehensible is that the bridge had been personally designed by the railroad's own chief engineer, Amasa Stone, and had been personally inspected and certified as completely structurally sound by Stone himself just days before the collapse occurred. Stone had also overruled other engineers who expressed concerns about the bridge design during construction. The subsequent investigation placed responsibility directly on Stone's design decisions, and he died by suicide 3 years later. 46. James Ritty owned a saloon in Dayton, Ohio, and spent considerable energy being frustrated by the fact that his employees were regularly stealing cash directly from his business because there was no reliable mechanical way to track how much money was coming in versus how much was actually making it into his till. So, in 1879, Ritty invented the mechanical cash register, a device that recorded each transaction with an audible bell and kept a running total that the owner could verify, fundamentally changing how businesses across America tracked their money and prevented employee theft. Ritty patented his invention and then almost immediately found himself in a bitter legal and business dispute with his own partner over the rights to the device. He eventually sold the patent for just $1,000 to a group that formed the National Cash Register Company in Dayton, which became one of America's most significant early corporations. 47. William Howard Taft of Cincinnati, Ohio, holds a distinction that no other person in the entire history of the United States has ever achieved before or since, which is that he served as both President of the United States and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at different points in his career, meaning he occupied the two most powerful individual positions in the entire American governmental system across a single lifetime. Taft served as the 27th president from 1909 to 1913, and privately considered his time in the White House deeply unhappy and stressful. Then was appointed Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in 1921 by President Harding and described that role as the fulfillment of his life's true ambition. Taft is the only human being who has ever led both the executive and judicial branches of the United States government. 48. The Great Serpent Mound in Adams County, Ohio, is the largest serpent-shaped effigy earthwork anywhere on the entire surface of the earth, stretching over 1,300 feet in length along a curving ridge in southern Ohio in the form of an uncoiling snake with an oval shape at its mouth that researchers believe may represent the serpent swallowing an egg. And this extraordinary ancient structure was built by indigenous people over 1,000 years ago through an engineering process that required moving and precisely shaping enormous quantities of earth without any modern tools or equipment of any kind. The Serpent Mound is a genuinely world-class archaeological and cultural landmark sitting in rural Ohio that draws far less international attention and tourism than comparable ancient monuments in other countries receive, despite being the largest example of its kind anywhere on the planet. 49. The first chewing gum patent ever issued in the United States went to William Semple of Mount Vernon, Ohio, in 1869. And the detail that makes this invention particularly and wonderfully absurd is that Semple was a practicing dentist who genuinely believed that chewing gum made from rubber would serve as an effective dental hygiene tool that would help clean teeth and strengthen jaw muscles, meaning the first American to legally own the concept of chewing gum thought he was inventing a medical device for oral health rather than a product that would eventually be found stuck under every school desk and movie theater seat across the entire country. Semple filed the patent, received it, and then never actually manufactured or commercially produced any gum himself, meaning he owned the first gum patent in America and did absolutely nothing with it. 50. Ohio is the 34th largest state in America by total land area, which places it firmly in the medium-sized category geographically. Yet it is simultaneously the 7th most populated state in the entire country, meaning Ohio is packing an enormous number of human beings into a relatively modest amount of physical space, and doing so in a geographic shape that one cartographer once described as looking like a rectangle that got into an argument with a diagonal line and lost. Ohio sits at the intersection of the American Northeast and Midwest, shares borders with 5 other states, and functions as a critical corridor through which an extraordinary volume of commerce, transportation, and political influence flows every single day. Presidential campaigns treat Ohio as one of the most essential states to win, yet Ohio's unusual combination of size, density, and shape remains genuinely difficult to explain on a map without pointing at it directly. 51. The blizzard that struck Ohio in January 1978 was so catastrophically severe that it remains the largest and most destructive winter storm in recorded Midwest history, dropping record snowfall across the entire state, with winds so powerful that they created drifts burying entire houses up to their rooflines while temperatures plunged to levels that made outdoor survival impossible within minutes of exposure. Over 50 Ohioans died during the storm, and thousands more were stranded in their vehicles on highways that disappeared completely under walls of blowing snow, before drivers had any warning or opportunity to turn around and seek shelter. The National Guard was deployed across the state, the governor declared a state of emergency, and entire Ohio communities were effectively cut off from the outside world for days, while rescue teams struggled to locate people buried inside their own homes under mountains of accumulated snow. 52. Marietta, Ohio holds the distinction of being the very first permanent American settlement established in the entire Northwest Territory, founded on April 7, 1788, when a group of Revolutionary War veterans led by General Rufus Putnam arrived by boat at the confluence of the Muskingum and Ohio rivers and began constructing a fortified settlement that would become the foundation of American expansion into the vast territory northwest of the Ohio River that eventually became the states of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. The founders named their settlement after Marie Antoinette of France in gratitude for French support during the Revolutionary War, which means Ohio's oldest city is named after a French queen who was guillotined just 5 years after the city bearing her honor was established. Marietta essentially opened the door to an entire region of the United States that became home to tens of millions of Americans. 53. Ohio is divided into 88 counties, which is more counties than any other Midwestern state contains, and the number 88 has never been satisfactorily explained by any historian, legislator, or government archivist who has seriously investigated the question of why Ohio's founders and early lawmakers settled on that exact figure when drawing the county boundaries across the state's territory. Some researchers have suggested practical geographic and population distribution reasoning behind the number, but none of these explanations have produced a definitive documented answer that everyone accepts. Other theories involve legislative compromises and regional political balancing acts during Ohio's early statehood period. The official historical record contains no clear founding document, meeting minute, or legislative debate transcript that explains with any certainty why Ohio has exactly 88 counties and not 87 or 89. 54. Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio holds the distinction of being the first college in the entire United States to admit both black students and women alongside white male students when it opened its doors in 1833, making it the first genuinely interracial and coeducational institution of higher learning in American history at a time when the idea of educating black people and women alongside white men was considered by mainstream American society to be somewhere between scandalous and genuinely dangerous to the social order. Oberlin's founders Charles Grandison Finney and Asa Mahan believed that education was a human right that should not be restricted by race or gender, and acted on that belief decades before the Civil War made such ideas slightly more acceptable in American public conversation. Oberlin graduates went on to become prominent abolitionists, educators, and civil rights figures throughout the 19th century. 55. In Marion Cemetery in Marion, Ohio, there is a 5,200-pound granite sphere mounted on a base that has been observed slowly and continuously rotating on its own since the late 1800s, with no mechanical explanation, no electrical component, no hidden motor, and no documented human intervention that accounts for the movement. And the rotation is real enough and consistent enough that the sphere has worn a visible groove into its own granite base over the decades of uninterrupted spinning. Ripley's Believe It or Not featured the rotating Marion sphere in 1929, bringing national attention to what was already a locally well-known phenomenon, and scientists, engineers, and curious investigators have examined the sphere repeatedly over the years without producing a universally accepted explanation for why a 5,000-pound granite ball in an Ohio cemetery has been quietly spinning by itself for over a century. 56. Ohio state law contains a provision stating that no person can be legally arrested on a Sunday or on the 4th of July, which sounds like the kind of legal fiction that gets invented and spread around the internet without any basis in reality. But this law actually exists in Ohio's legal code as a genuine historical statute that was written into law during an earlier era of American legal tradition, when certain days were considered so sacred or so civically significant that the ordinary processes of law enforcement were suspended out of respect for their importance. The law technically remains on the books and has never been formally repealed by the Ohio legislature. though it is universally ignored by every law enforcement agency operating in the state, and has not been successfully invoked as a legal defense in any documented Ohio court case in the modern era. 57. The hot dog. As Americans know it today, a sausage served inside a bread roll that can be carried and eaten while standing at a sporting event is credited in significant part to Harry M. Stevens of Niles, Ohio, who was working as a food vendor at a New York baseball stadium around 1900 and began serving sausages tucked inside rolls because they were easier to handle than the white gloves he had previously been providing to customers eating cold food in the stands. Stevens allegedly called them Red Hots, and a sports cartoonist named Tad Dorgan, who was present at the stadium that day, drew an illustration of the snack and labeled it a hot dog because he could not spell dachshund, which was the breed of dog the sausage resembled. An Ohio man and a cartoonist who could not spell collaborated to name one of America's most iconic foods. 58. The first full-time dedicated automobile service station in the United States opened in Ohio in 1899, at a time when the American automobile industry was so new and so undeveloped that the majority of American citizens had never personally seen a working car in person, let alone owned one. Meaning Ohio opened a facility specifically designed to service and fuel automobiles, roughly one full year before widespread car ownership was even a realistic concept for ordinary American families to consider. The station was equipped to provide fuel, mechanical service, and basic automotive care to the handful of wealthy early adopters who had already purchased vehicles. Ohio essentially built the infrastructure for the automobile age before the automobile age had actually arrived for most Americans, which is either remarkably forward-thinking or a very Ohio way of preparing for something before anyone else was ready for it. 59. Ohio law technically requires any person who wishes to catch a mouse to first obtain a valid hunting license before pursuing, trapping, or capturing the mouse in question, a requirement that exists because Ohio's wildlife protection ordinances were written in sufficiently broad and all-encompassing language that mice fall within the legal definition of wildlife subject to hunting regulations, meaning that an Ohio homeowner who sets a mousetrap in their kitchen without a current hunting license is technically committing an unlicensed wildlife capture violation under state law. No Ohio prosecutor has ever pursued charges against an unlicensed mouse catcher in any documented case in the state's legal history. The law sits quietly in Ohio's legal code, protecting the mouse population from unlicensed pursuit, while every Ohio hardware store continues selling mousetraps to people who have never once considered applying for a hunting license before using them. 60. The Longaberger Company headquarters building in Newark, Ohio, was constructed in 1997 in the precise architectural shape of a giant medium market basket, the company's most popular product, scaled up to 7 full stories in height and complete with giant wooden handles attached to the roof that weighed around 150 tons each, and had to be heated in winter to prevent them from contracting and damaging the building's structure. The basket building stood approximately 160,000 square feet of actual office space, inside a structure that looked from the outside like a picnic accessory that had been enlarged by a science fiction ray gun. It became for a period of time the most photographed building in the entire state of Ohio, and attracted tourists who drove significant distances specifically to stand next to a 7-story basket in Newark, Ohio, and take a photograph proving it was real. 61. Cheez-Its were invented in Dayton, Ohio in 1921 by the Green & Green Company, making Ohio directly responsible for one of the most aggressively addictive snack crackers in American history, the kind of snack that a person opens intending to eat 6 of, and then looks down 20 minutes later to find an empty box and no memory of the intervening time. Then, separately and completely independently, the Uno card game was invented in Reading, Ohio in 1971 by a barber named Merle Robbins, who was trying to settle an argument with his son about the rules of a different card game and ended up creating instead a game that has since destroyed more family relationships, triggered more kitchen table arguments, and caused more friendships to end on vacation than possibly any other card game in American history. Ohio gave America both Cheez-Its and Uno, and has never once been properly thanked for either of them. 62. Ohio contributed nearly 10% of all military armaments and war materials produced across the entire United States during World War II, which is an almost incomprehensible industrial output figure for a single Midwestern state. With Ohio factories running continuously around the clock producing aircraft components, jeeps, military vehicles, ammunition, steel, rubber, and equipment that equipped American forces fighting simultaneously on two separate sides of the planet. Cities like Akron, Youngstown, Toledo, Dayton, and Cleveland converted their entire industrial capacity to wartime production and kept it running at maximum output for years. Ohio workers, many of them women entering factory floors for the first time, produced the physical material backbone of the American war effort at a scale that historians acknowledge was absolutely critical to the Allied victory. Yet Ohio's wartime industrial contribution is almost never mentioned in mainstream American history education at any level. 63. On December 3, 1979, the British rock band The Who were scheduled to perform at Cincinnati's Riverfront Coliseum, and thousands of fans had been waiting outside the venue for hours in a massive crowd because the concert used festival seating, which meant there were no assigned seats inside, and getting a good position required arriving early and rushing the doors the moment they opened. When the doors finally opened, the crowd surge was immediate and catastrophic, with thousands of people pushing forward simultaneously into a small number of open entrances, while those at the front had nowhere to go and no ability to stay upright under the pressure from behind. 11 people were crushed to death that evening before the concert even began, and The Who performed the show without knowing what had happened outside. Ohio had no venue crowd safety laws at the time and passed none for 12 years afterward. 64. Charles Goodyear spent years in desperate poverty, conducting obsessive rubber experiments that his family, his creditors, and his contemporaries considered the delusional hobby of a man who had lost his grip on practical reality. And it was in Woburn, Massachusetts rather than Ohio, where he accidentally dropped a rubber and sulfur mixture onto a hot stove in 1839 and discovered vulcanization, the chemical process that transforms natural rubber from a substance that melts in summer heat and cracks in winter cold into a stable, durable material that can be used for tires, boots, hoses, gaskets, and hundreds of essential products. Goodyear never became wealthy from his discovery despite its world-changing importance and died deeply in debt. The Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, established later in Akron, Ohio, took his name as tribute, meaning Ohio's most famous rubber company is named after a man who made his discovery somewhere else entirely. 65. The first Wendy's restaurant opened on November 15, 1969, on Broad Street in Columbus, Ohio, when a 37-year-old entrepreneur named Dave Thomas decided the existing fast food burger market was not meeting his personal standards and opened his own restaurant, which he named after his 8-year-old daughter Melinda Lou Thomas, whose childhood nickname was Wendy. Thomas built Wendy's into one of the largest fast food chains in American history, with thousands of locations across the country serving the square burger and the Frosty to millions of customers. And the face of Wendy, as a red-haired freckled girl in pigtails, became one of the most recognizable brand images in American food culture. Melinda Thomas later said publicly in interviews that growing up as the living human identity behind a fast food chain was a complicated experience, and she wished her father had simply named it something else. 66. Sugar Creek, Ohio is a small town in Tuscarawas County that has styled itself as the Little Switzerland of Ohio due to its large Amish and Swiss heritage population. And sitting in the middle of this quietly charming Midwestern town is the world's largest cuckoo clock. A fully functional giant timepiece built to look like a traditional Swiss chalet that stands over 23 feet tall and performs an actual mechanical cuckoo display every 30 minutes with a life-sized cuckoo bird. Emerging from the clock face on schedule, while tourists stand on the sidewalk below watching a giant bird pop out of a giant clock in small-town Ohio, as though this is a completely normal thing to encounter on a Tuesday afternoon drive through the Midwest. The clock has been operating as Sugar Creek's primary tourist attraction for decades. 67. Ohio's legal code contains an actual enforceable statute making it illegal to fish for whales on a Sunday, which is a law that presents several immediate and compounding layers of absurdity, beginning with the foundational geographic reality that Ohio is a completely landlocked state sitting hundreds of miles from the nearest ocean with no whales living in any body of water within or adjacent to its borders, making Sunday whale fishing not merely illegal in Ohio, but also physically impossible by the basic constraints of marine biology and geography. The law exists because Ohio's early legal statutes were sometimes written in broad, sweeping language that attempted to cover all possible scenarios, including scenarios that could never occur in Ohio under any realistic set of circumstances. The whale fishing prohibition remains on the books today, protecting Ohio's non-existent whale population from Sunday fishermen who do not exist. 68. The world's first electric traffic light was installed in Cleveland, Ohio on August 5, 1914, at the corner of Euclid Avenue and East 105th Street, a four-way intersection that had become sufficiently chaotic with the growing volume of automobile and pedestrian traffic that the city authorized American Traffic Signal Company to install an electrically operated signal system that used red and green lights controlled from a nearby booth by a police officer who could switch them manually and sound a buzzer to warn drivers that the signal was about to change. This Cleveland intersection became the point of origin for a traffic management technology that now operates at hundreds of thousands of intersections across every city in America and billions more around the entire world. Every driver who has ever stopped at a red light anywhere on Earth owes that experience directly to a street corner in Cleveland, Ohio. 69. In January 1913, an Ohio couple named Jesse and Matilda Beagle, who lived in the small community of Batavia, Ohio, decided that the most practical and economical way to transport their 8-month-old infant son James to his grandmother's house 1 mile away was to attach the appropriate amount of United States postage stamps to the child, declare him as a package with a value of 50 cents for insurance purposes, and hand him to their rural mail carrier, who then carried the baby to the grandmother's door and delivered him as though he were a parcel containing books or dry goods. The postage cost 15 cents. The United States Post Office had recently extended mail service to rural areas, and the regulations had not yet specifically excluded human beings from the list of items that could legally be shipped. An oversight that was corrected shortly after Ohio demonstrated exactly why that clarification was necessary. 70. Ohio sits in a region that most Americans associate with flat farmland and tornado warnings, rather than seismic activity of any meaningful kind. So the 1937 Anna earthquake, which struck Shelby County in western Ohio, with enough force to crack building foundations, collapse chimneys, damage bridges, and send residents running into the streets in genuine panic, remains the most significant earthquake in Ohio's recorded history, and a geological event that most people outside the state have never heard of. Despite it being centered in a densely populated agricultural region where nobody had earthquake preparedness plans of any kind, because nobody believed Ohio was the kind of place where earthquakes happened. Geologists attribute Ohio's seismic activity to ancient fault lines buried beneath the surface that occasionally remind the state that the ground beneath its cornfields is not as permanently stable as it appears from above. 71. Bellefontaine, Ohio already holds the distinction of having the first concrete street in American history poured within its borders in 1891. But the town doubles down on its record book presence by also being home to McKinley Street, which at just 30 feet in total length is officially recognized as the shortest street in the entire United States, and possibly the world. A street so brief that a person of average walking speed can cover its complete length in under 5 seconds without accelerating or making any particular effort. McKinley Street has a proper street sign, an official city designation, and appears on municipal maps as a legitimate named thoroughfare, despite being shorter than most Americans' driveways. Bellefontaine is therefore the only city in Ohio and possibly in America that can claim both the oldest concrete pavement and the shortest street within the same municipal boundary. And that is Ohio, a state that gave America presidents who died from their own speeches, rivers that caught fire, and a fish protection law that nobody can explain. If you made it all the way to 71, you are exactly the kind of person who belongs here. Drop a comment below telling us which fact broke your brain the most. If this video made you question everything you learned in history class, hit that like button and subscribe to Dumbest Things, because we are just getting started, and trust us, every single state has secrets this ridiculous waiting to be exposed.